The output, we're writing up a State of the North report. When I say we, that's Katie Shaw, our academic partner from Northumbria University, who will be known to many of you, is pulling this all together with a view to launching the final State of Report in December. So we've been absolutely blown away by how much evidence we've received, lots of written submissions, which Katie's had the joy of going through, but we're really already beginning to see some real evidence to support what the problems are in terms of the North, but also what sort of recommendations and asks of government that the North needs. Culture and the pipeline of culture in the North is something we all need to be proud of. And when we originally started this inquiry, it was pre-pandemic, but even then it was a need that there was clearly a need, that we need to level up and balance up and actually celebrate that Northern culture. And it should not be the case that because of where you're born, that you don't have that access or opportunity, and you have to basically go to London or whatever to pursue that talent or career or opportunity. So we had some amazing, really amazing evidence. Today, we want to ask some really big questions. And on our agenda are, how do we rebuild confidence in the North's cultural capital and bridge the gaps left by the COVID-19 pandemic? You know, life has been brutal, really, for many, but particularly, I think, in the cultural sector, where jobs and opportunities have just literally disappeared. So we need to build back that confidence, because culture is so important to our economy. And what has actually been the impact of the pandemic on the North's cultural economy, the talent pipeline, and our communities' health and well-being? These are all really key points into how we do recover and how essential culture is. Culture really, for everyone, I think, has been sorely missed. And as it gets back to I hesitate to say normal, because I think things have changed for good, but what a vital contribution to the economy culture makes to basically our fabrics of our cities and towns across the North. Next question is, how can we maximize the North's potential and unlock and rebalance opportunities in the North cities, towns? And again, this is for tomorrow's generation. You know, the kids today or the young people today, are they being denied opportunities, and how do we actually really, really build back better for them? And how do we level up, rebalance, build back brand recognition of the North's world-class reputation? And I think that's a really important thing about the Northern brand, and when you don't have to look very far. Anybody doesn't have to look, whether you're in Liverpool or Cumbria or Sheffield or whatever, to be able to point to fantastic cultural achievements and talent. And we're here, and this report will actually, celebrate that, but also have a very good picture of what the North really does need to build back and get us back on track. So I think that's absolutely enough from me. I'm really delighted that we've got such a stellar lineup today to kick us off with the big questions on opportunities. We've got Mayor and MP Dan Jarvis, Metro Mayor of Sheffield City Region, so really pleased to have you there. We've also got Catherine Dewar, the Northwest Regional Director of historic England. And I'm really pleased to see you, Catherine, because I think it's a really important thing, that whole point about, you know, historic and what culture actually is in the Northwest. I think it's been really, I think we've talked before about that. And also we'll have Ed Norris, founder of the Velio Festival. Then we'll have some Q&A. I want to bring people in on the chat as well. And the second half really is really about how we can maximize the North's potential and unlock the rebalance those opportunities in the cities and towns for tomorrow's regeneration. And we've got Sacha Lord from Greater Manchester, as the nighttime economy advisor, who's often in the news. And I'm really pleased that he'll be joining us. And also, I think for anybody from Greater Manchester, see Tony Lloyd there, the founder of Parklife. I think it was a very, very busy weekend 2 weeks ago when Parklife was on. But amazing time. But yeah, the economy's been really hard hit in most of our cities there. And of course, Claire Malcolm, new writing for the North, and Professor Ian Wray from the UK 2070 Commission, all great contributions. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Dan if he would mind kicking us off and giving his sort of opening remarks around opportunities and your take on building back. Dan.
Thanks a lot, Jill. Well, good afternoon to you and to everybody, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really glad to be alongside some great champions of Northern culture, many of whom have far more experience than I do in the sector. I'm here mainly today in my capacity as the Mayor of South Yorkshire, but I should declare an interest as the MP for Barnsley Central, and I'm also somebody who served as a Shadow Minister for Culture for a couple of years. And I've long held the conviction that the arts, culture, the heritage sector is vital not just for our economy, but for our character and our spirit as a region and as a nation. As such, when I was elected as mayor, I stated my ambition to put culture at the heart of our region, and I've been determined to try and realise this. This is because I believe that Metro mayors like myself and my next door neighbour, West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Brabin, who I think gave evidence at a previous session, we think that we've got a key role in driving and championing this agenda. So this afternoon, I'd like to outline what we're doing in South Yorkshire to try and get culture back on track, why the sector is so central to our recovery and our renewal, as well as the levelling up agenda, particularly across the north of England. However, first of all, I think we do need to acknowledge the impact the pandemic had and is still having upon the sector. In fact, recent research commissioned by the University of Sheffield found that the broad sector of the arts, entertainment and recreation saw a 60% decline in output and 450,000 jobs furloughed. It's 55% of the total jobs in the sector, which is way above the national average of 16%. This research also suggested that South Yorkshire appears to be one of the regions most affected by COVID, with an estimated total sector output loss of more than 20%. Yet, up against all of this adversity, many have found truly innovative and new ways to operate and to connect with people at what has been a deeply isolating time. One such example is the team at Experience Barnsley Museum and the Discovery Centre, who've worked very hard to put their communities and their users at the heart of what they do, and have been rewarded for their outstanding efforts by being shortlisted as Museum of the Year, a great achievement for a small museum. So to recognise this hardship, as well as to applaud this innovation, last week I announced £1 million of investment with the 4 councils of South Yorkshire to help the sector rebuild from the pandemic. Each local authority will be able to shape their programme to suit their area within a broad set of mutually agreed outcomes, recognising that the sector ecology of, for example, Sheffield, will likely require a different solution to, say, Rotherham. This funding will help recovery, but also renewal, and is a start to unlocking the potential of the sector. The trouble is, I think that in the past, we've been unable to make a strong case for this potential, and that, in some cases, as humble and unassuming Northerners, we don't always shout as much as we should about our successes or market our world-class cultural assets as loud and as proud as we should. And in South Yorkshire, we're doing what we can to try and change this. Just last Friday, I was delighted to open our Cultural and Creative Industries Summit, which took place to coincide with the red carpet premiere of Everybody's Talking About Jamie, taking place in Sheffield. Jamie is a perfect example of a success story for the creative industries of our region. The stage play was commissioned by Sheffield Theatres before transferring to the West End and successfully touring the country. Sheffield-based Warp Films shot the film locally, and the film was bought by Amazon Prime and premiered online last week. And the stage play will open in the US later this year. Not only that, the story is set in Sheffield too. And in true Jamie style, we seized the opportunity to subvert our stereotypes and shout loud and proud about the success the film represents, amplifying the spotlight shone on our region. The summit itself brought together diverse voices from across the sector to discuss the broader opportunities of the region's cultural and creative industries. And I'm happy that we will be supporting the continuation of these conversations with the launch of our Cultural and Creative Industries Network. But that isn't all we're doing. Earlier this year, I appointed a project director, Kate Brindley, to lead a programme of work to untap this potential and leverage more public and private funding for the sector. This programme has the following focuses: developing a strategic approach and regional evidence base to make the case for culture, including progressing a regional strategy, using convening power to build collaborations to strengthen the sector, developing an overarching narrative of place and capacity, as well as embedding arts, culture and heritage considerations into place-based investment, identifying and supporting investment and growth opportunities for creative sectors, including forging a partnership with Creative England to deliver bespoke business support. And finally, advocating for and supporting the creative and cultural sectors in recovery and renewal, like the £1 million of investment that I mentioned a moment ago. This is just the start of our commitment, because I want us to be ambitious and to promote the centrality of culture to placemaking, not just in South Yorkshire, but right across the north. But we need the government to match this ambition too. And just last week, I called on the government in Parliament to include the sector in their levelling up agenda. Investment is required so that existing disparities in levels of funding within the north and the divides and inequalities that follow do not widen further. And because we need to kindle collaboration between regions, not stoke competition. Because these sectors, they're not a luxury. In strict economics alone, it makes sense to invest in. But going beyond this, levelling up has got to be more than just an economic mission. It's got to be about improving how people feel about the places where they live. Culture does this. It adds colour to people's lives and makes a place somewhere people want to live, study, work, and invest in. No one deserves to live in black and white. And I think that there is a real opportunity now to level up the north, and culture, arts and heritage must be central to that. So what do we need to do to achieve this? I boiled it down to 3 key areas. 1, capacity, increasing this both within the sector and within institutions charged with supporting the sector, including mayoral combined authorities. 2, investment, identifying a pipeline of opportunities and securing funding to support these. This can be done through the government's levelling up agenda. In fact, the government did list culture as an element of their levelling up fund, as well as within their community renewal fund, with one of our local authority areas, Rotherham, putting forward a bid for funding for their 2025 Children's Capital of Culture programme. 3, strategy, ensuring that what we do is guided by an overarching mission and our approaches joined up, but allowing for local flexibility, recognising the unique nature of cultural ecologies, that each area has its own needs and its own opportunities. Clearly, these are broad points, but they may offer a starter, and input from all stakeholders will be able to populate these points with experience and depth. And so, through this APPG, I hope that we can establish a clear vision and direction for Northern culture, identify the necessary measures to achieve this vision, and from there make a united pan-Northern effort to rebuild, rebalance and recover, an advocate for the resources we need to do this. I really do look forward to the findings of the State of the North report, and once again want to take the opportunity to pledge my support for this vital agenda. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Dan. And just to emphasise, you know, that's what the inquiry is ultimately about, is getting that pan-Northern clear ask that actually covers, you know, and that demonstrates that we work together and we work well together. There's one particular question, I'll just quickly, before I move on, from Anita Greenhill, which says, Dan Jarvis, there is an immediate need to dig deeper into specific cultural industries and their locations. We can see existing barriers to growth in relation to employment and enterprise. Have you identified core common ground goals that can truly redistribute resources, including identifying skill sets, technologies, infrastructure improvements that would help smaller funding bodies, including local organisation, get onto that first step of strategic funding? And I think that's an interesting point, and you may want to come back quickly, because obviously, you know, when you think about communities and culture, a lot of culture is very much at community level, and there's lots of projects, and one of the difficulties often is actually making sure those opportunities are accessible at local level. But I don't know, I mean, we can come back to that, but if you've got a quick response to that, Dan.
But my quick first, I think it's a very good, big, comprehensive question that probably deserves an evidence session all of it. So I don't know whether somebody's writing a PhD thesis, and maybe that was the sort of genesis of the question.
Yeah.
I mean, this is precisely why I appointed a project director. So mayoral combined authorities are still relatively new and immature organisations. I specifically focus some of the limited resource that I have in order to invest in a project director, so we can look at these kind of issues, working very closely with our local partners and stakeholders. The local authorities are crucial allies in all of this, our universities, and then members of the sector more generally. So I don't have a complete response to the question, but those are precisely the questions that we are asking, precisely the sort of things that we are working towards. And that's why we've now got a project director who can draw together those kind of sort of bits of work in order that we will be in a position to respond more fully in due course.
Yeah, okay, well, I think that's right. And but thanks, Anita, for that. And I'm sure that Katie and everyone is looking at that, and we'll come back to that. So let's move on now to Catherine Dewar from Northwest Regional Director of Historic England to talk around the opportunities again for rebalancing and rebuilding Northern culture and getting us back on track. Catherine, nice to see you.
Thanks very much, Jill. Great to be here, and really looking forward to speaking passionately for heritage and culture, not just the work of Historic England. Our heritage is one of the most democratic and accessible parts of the North's cultural life. Wherever we live in the North, we're surrounded by historic landscapes and streets, industrial and coastal heritage. And while most of it's privately owned, it can still be freely enjoyed by just walking down the street, visiting local events or parks, or just simply going to work or school. And in lockdown, I really loved seeing people exploring and discovering their local heritage, and how we all realise just how critical it is to our well-being. So we really welcome the focus of this APPG on how we can provide a united voice on pan-Northern cultural priorities. We've been working closely with other government bodies, the Arts Council, National Lottery Heritage Fund, and the Environment Agency, alongside Northern NP11 LEPs, to put culture and heritage at the heart of COVID recovery and promotion of the North. And we should absolutely celebrate the culture of the North. When people picture the North, I think most people think of our landscapes, heritage, and of course the people. But we should also be using culture and heritage to power economic and social growth as part of post-pandemic recovery. Heritage and culture can really transform places for the better by driving up business confidence and civic pride, attracting visitors to strengthen economic growth, and providing positive reasons for businesses and workers to locate in an area. And the work that we've been doing in collaboration across the North shows the demand for strategic place-based investment, such as the Levelling Up Fund, which builds on the value of heritage and culture. It's no surprise to us that nearly a third of the project in the 1.6 billion Towns Fund focused on revitalising heritage assets. And we also recognise that in order to make the most of this critical funding, we also need to consider the resources to deliver these fantastic projects. So there's huge potential to make the most of our Northern Heritage assets. I could talk to you about our High Streets Heritage Action Zone programme, where we're investing 33 million into high streets across the North, and our campaign this week to hear what people love about their high streets. But just today we've published new research, so I'm going to talk to you about that. And that's about textile mills. And for those who know me, you know that I'm really passionate about reusing our mills for positive change. And our textile mills are fundamental to the history and culture of Northern England. They really define the landscape of significant parts of the North, whether that's Greater Manchester's massive, imposing brick cotton mills and chimneys, or further to the east, the woolen and flax mills of West Yorkshire. And these really distinctive buildings and sites can accommodate stunning homes, workplaces, and cultural spaces. And our historic mill buildings offer a really tangible link to the past and deserve a future at the centre of local communities, transforming places and giving people confidence and pride in their local area. So reusing existing mills also makes total sense. They're usually centrally located, so people don't have to travel as far. They're close to jobs, services, and amenities. And there's also, of course, the embodied carbon within the existing buildings to take into account. The most sustainable buildings are those that are already built. The repair and reuse of historic buildings is inherently less carbon intensive than demolishing and rebuilding. And we have to commit to repairing and reusing our existing building stock in order to build back greener. So what's the scale of the opportunity? Well, hot off the press, we've published this report and it shows that there are 688 mills currently vacant or underused across the North. And that equates to a whopping 2.3 million square metres of vacant floor space. So that could create 42,000 homes, or if it was used for office or light industrial uses, over 84,000 jobs. Many mills have been reused, and we all know some great examples. Holmes Mill in Clitheroe is a personal favourite in Lancashire, really great example of the impact that the reuse of a mill can have on a town. So I really recommend you go and visit. But there are still loads that need targeted investment to secure new futures. So here in the North, our cultural heritage really is our brand, and we've already got the key ingredients to make places more attractive. We need to seize the opportunities to turn kind of eyesores into landmarks again, and provide hope and pride for communities as we recover from the effects of the pandemic. So we've already got what it takes. We absolutely need to continue to collaborate and ensure that place-based activity focus even more investment where it's needed most and will have the greatest impact for local people, and we can show the real power of culture and heritage for the North. Thanks, Jill.
That's really great, Catherine. I think it is that whole thing about the heritage and just, as I say, just looking at the door and just getting people to really, as we saw in the pandemic, people really getting into tune with their local communities, local areas, and actually delving deep. And it was something that people could do in their daily exercise. But
yeah,
I think,
exactly.
It's it was a real opportunity, if there was an opportunity from the pandemic, for people to really re-engage with their local history and heritage and understand a little bit more. So I think that was the only one of the few pluses I think I can think. I think I'm just going to quickly, so thank you very much for that. I want to just quickly, because I think we may have lost Ed Norris from Vilio Festival, unless somebody tells me that that's not the case. So I just wondered if I could invite perhaps some of our parliamentarians on the call. We've got Kim Johnson from Liverpool, and as chair from our Liverpool City region all-party parliamentary group. We've got Tony Lloyd, who's one of the officers, and also Lord Inglewood, who's a very active contributor to the inquiry. Just wonder if you had any questions to Catherine or Dan to pose. Kim, you put your hand up straight away. So, and then Lord Inglewood, Tony, we got you. Yeah. So we'll do it in that order, if that's okay.
Thanks, Jill. And I think Dan's opening presentation posed some really important questions, and particularly around the impact that COVID has had on our creative sector. We will know that there are thousands within that, from the excluded group who weren't supported. And I can't remember, it was Oliver Dowden that suggested, or with the Sacha Javid, who suggested that, these very highly talented creative people should go and be retrained to do other jobs, which I think was a bit remiss of him. But I'm particularly concerned about how we grow talent, and I've put that in the chat, about young people and raising their aspirations of, being involved in the art and creative sector, particularly in terms of so many FE and HE colleges now are looking to axe those types of courses, and the fact that so many children don't get access to musical education in schools anymore the way that we used to. So I think there's a bit of a glut there that maybe needs to be looked at. And in terms of Catherine's presentation about repurposing building, I think that's a great idea, but I don't know whether there's a disconnect there in terms of planning and the planning department to be able to do that. I'm involved in a local theatre company in Liverpool. We wanted to use some space in the city centre for young people to be able to practice, and the planning department was not that enthusiastic about that. So I just wanted to know what more needs to be done to make sure that there were greater connections in terms of departments to make sure that we're able to carry out these great ambitions that we're looking to do in the north. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I think that's a really valid point about how you do join government thinking up, very much so. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do with the Northern Culture APPG, is to get that sort of logic, really, to sort of say that it is, from what Catherine said and what Dan said and what other people have said on the inquiry, is all very much it's not just one department, but culture's got to be seen more broadly as an economic solution. That the big subject of the day, it's a great opportunity for the economy, but also for tomorrow's generation. So all of those things. So next up, we've got Lord Inglewood. Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. Hello, welcome to everybody. I think that the theme that Dan Jarvis made, that culture is an essential component of levelling up, whatever both culture exactly is and whatever levelling up exactly is absolutely crucial and core to the way we go forward. I think that's important, though, that we understand there's a slight difference between northern culture and culture in the north. Some of the culture in the north is culture which has a much wider scope, and the two interrelate, and sometimes they actually hybridize. But I think those are two slightly different themes, and I think we want to recognize that each is important and each can feed constructively off the other. What I was not so sure about in Dan's comments was the framework he was putting around culture. The whole point of culture is that it's actually, a lot of it, anti-establishment. If, like me, you come from Cumbria, the most famous people in the cultural context that we probably have produced have been Wordsworth and Coleridge. They were effectively hippies of their generation. They were supposed by the authorities to be spies for the French. They lived in a derelict house, which has survived because it's called Dove Cottage now. And these people were outside the establishment. And in order for culture to really flourish, you've got to find a way of it enabling to happen without frameworks from local authorities and everything just bearing down on it. Because that is often where you will get the most original and worthwhile things emerging. And of course, from a political perspective, then is the problem that if you fund culture, you're going to have quite a lot of misses. And the nature of political scrutiny, particularly political scrutiny of public money, is that if things go wrong, an awful lot of stuff hits the fan and there's criticism. But we can't have a thriving cultural sector unless a certain amount of it, of the money that's spent and the initiatives that are taken, don't work. Now, I'd like to turn then to Catherine's point, because I think there's two things that are absolutely central. The first one is the point she made about walking down the street. It's free for everybody to see and enjoy and understand the buildings that are there. And if you go around different bits of Britain, in my experience, there's enormous pleasure from doing that, and it's really worthwhile. When we go on and talk about levelling up funds and things, the perennial problem, just it was with the Millennium projects, is not necessarily getting the resources to carry out whatever kind of retrofitting it is you might want to do to a mill. It is then ensuring it is subsequently sustainable. Projects are sexy, maintenance isn't. Maintenance, which is or lack of maintenance, is what's caused a lot of the problems to our built infrastructure. And as politicians, I think one of the things that is important is to try and up the profile of the importance of maintenance, and within the tax system, reward people who maintain things properly, be it somebody living in a terraced house or be it somebody who is responsible for a large mill building. Give them a fiscal incentive to do it properly, because that way you're going to save yourself both a lot of trouble in the future and also probably preserve a lot more which is worthwhile than otherwise would be the case.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to come back to Dan and Catherine shortly, but Tony, could you comment on opportunities and your thoughts, please?
Yeah, thanks. I think the first question I want to pose really to our guest today is a fairly simple one. I'm very northern, and so I always welcome, roughly speaking, anything that has the label North on it. But all that said, the North is a very diverse place, and it's how we recognise that diversity and how we recognise as well that whilst devolution and devolution of decision making is an important part of giving capacity to the culture sector, if there be such a thing, in actual fact we have to devolve way below our devolved institutions, and it's how we make sure, and it's sort of partly I think the point that that was made a few moments ago by Lord Inglewood, that in the end it isn't about trying to recreate hippie retreats for everybody, but it is about recognising that localism matters. So, for example, we've now got resident Burnley Asian communities who have a distinct identity from other communities. For example, we've got that in my own constituency of Rochdale, and it's a recognition that actually trying to enhance the capacity of those communities to speak for themselves is part of what culture is all about. And Lord Inglewood's point is right. Some of it will work. A lot of it may not work particularly well, but we do have to begin to examine how we can be supportive because otherwise we block those new ideas that periodically and generationally come racing through in different areas. So that's what there is, of course, though, ultimately an important question about financing of culture across the piece and the differential financing, because whilst I am very happy to go along to opera, for example, and I am, it's one of the joys of life. Nevertheless, opera is phenomenally well supported institutionally and incredibly expensive, and street theatre by young kids is incredibly cheap and actually incredibly badly supported. But the vibrancy of localism is more likely to be achieved through those local street theatres and through bringing even Opera North to across different parts of the north of England. So there is a genuine question about equity of access to finance to make sure that we can change things. And so that's really a question to our panel. I would also like to put to Catherine in particular a rather unfair question. Remember, I'm still bitten by the demolition of the house that belonged to the Rylands, the Rylands Library of Manchester fame. Their house was demolished, and at the time when I was making protests to various national bodies, I was told that in cultural terms, this was only a low-level listed building and therefore not particularly deserving of great protection. And I did point out that actually the North didn't have as many of the great buildings that would be in London and the southeast, because actually, frankly, a lot of the money that the North made in the 19th century was dissipated down south to build some of those institutions and buildings. So we need a recognition that the baseline for what has merit is different. It's not about saying it's better or worse, it's saying it's relevant to local communities, because in actual fact the built environment is the most immediate thing that we access as part of the culture. I think the very final point I would just put, and this is probably one for Dan really, is if we look at the politics of this, how do we make sure this is on the agenda? Because in the end, this is a political question. Culture isn't just about economics, it's about our way of life. It's about who we are as individuals, who we are as communities, as society. Keeping it on the political agenda is really important. So what do we do across the North to make sure that this Northern voice is something that does echo and does, in echoing, get a response? Because otherwise it can just be that we make a small noise and it simply disappears into the wilderness, and that would be a shame, because we are better than that and bigger than that. Thanks.
I very much hope that the State of the North report will be a really big stepping stone in the direction of collaboration and making that voice louder. But I'm going to, there's a specific question to you, Catherine, from Teresa Easton, which I'll come back to. But if I just ask Dan to perhaps come back on some of the thoughts and comments and questions that have been raised from Kim, Lord Inglewood and Tony, that would be good. And I'll come to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'll be delighted to. It's quite an unusual experience for me. I'm not quite sure whether it's poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher in terms of responding to colleagues in Parliament. Kim made a really important point, I thought, about the importance of young people. And I think creativity is a life skill, and giving kids the opportunity to engage with culture, the arts, heritage, I think it's so important in terms of developing their character and their confidence. I'm heavily involved with the Barnsley Youth Choir. It's an amazing organisation that really from nowhere has become one of the best youth choirs in the world. And the opportunities that it provides to kids, mostly from pretty deprived backgrounds, is just extraordinary. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and at a local level we do what we can to support it, but then also kind of sort of bridge into the next point that Kim made about the skills side of it and the economic and employment opportunities. Kim will know that Steve Rotherham talks a lot about this, and I currently chair the forum of the Metro Mayors, the M10. So I think Kim's question kind of sort of primes me to make sure that our next M10 meeting, because all of the Northern Metro Mayors are really supportive of this agenda. Huge amount of work in Greater Manchester and north of Tyne, and in City Region of Liverpool and in West and South Yorkshire as well. So I think that is a primer for me to catch up with Steve and Jamie and Andy Burnham and Tracy to look at what more we can do regionally, but in terms of the conversations we're having with national government, how we can sort of collectively seek to progress that agenda. I thought Lord Inglewood and Tony made really kind of big, interesting, useful points, partly around kind of fiscal incentives and investment. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is a Yorkshire MP. So I think he needs to be an important stakeholder in terms of getting him and the Treasury to recognise the importance of it investing in the sector. But I think also important points made by Tony as well around devolution. He understands, because he's been doing this much longer than I, that the devolved framework, the landscape is changing. We're getting more metro mayors than previously was the case. And I think we need to think about how we can cooperate effectively, both in terms of joined up government through local authorities, through metro mayors and national government, so that we can collectively demonstrate that this should be a priority at this particular moment, both in terms of levelling up and in terms of post-pandemic economic regeneration. I thought, to Tony's final point, I will just end with a sort of brief response to, because I think it was an interesting point about the politics of all of this and how we can essentially kind of keep this on the political agenda and focus the minds of decision makers. I think there are two ways in which we can do it. Well, three, if you include those of us who believe in it, I think need to put our shoulder to the wheel. And that's why in South Yorkshire, we've just allocated £1 million. I'd like to have given more, but that took quite a bit to do. And that hopefully sort of demonstrates our commitment. Similarly, the appointment of a project director, the money for Kate, she's on the call, that came from a relatively small pot that I control through the Mayoral Capacity Fund, and I prioritised culture as a sort of demonstration of my commitment to it. But I think more generally, Tony, Kim, Lord Inglewood, myself, we are not normal in the sense that we spend a lot of our time talking about politics. Most normal people don't do that. They're doing other things. They're listening to music. They're watching the telly. They're going to the cinema. They're at the theatre. And I think as political decision makers, we need to recognise the importance of all of that to people's lives, and therefore ensuring that we're taking decisions to support it. I think the other aspect of it, just finally, is about opportunity. And it's about, particularly in the context of the North, making sure particularly that every kid, regardless of where they grow up, gets the same opportunities as kids who go to private schools and who are brought up in more affluent parts of the country. So that access of opportunity to engage with the arts, I think that should be a political priority, and it hopefully should sort of propel us all forward to recognise the importance of the agenda and to properly invest and organise in it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm very keen, as part of this inquiry, but also the Northern Culture All Party Parliamentary Group, to sort of have an associate membership of all the Northern mayors, or certainly to bring that conversation together, because I think that'd be really powerful moving forward. So that might be one of the outputs from the State of the North report or the inquiry. So I think that's good. Tony, did you look like you wanted to come back before I go on to Catherine? Or
I think I was just saying thank you to Dan, actually.
Oh, okay, well, very, very nice, very comradely. So, Catherine, so there's Teresa Easton says, I'm part of an artist's studio and workshop complex in Old Flax Mill, Grade 2 listed building. As freelance artists, we struggle to access investment in the building, making it accessible. How can we access funds to remain sustainable? And I think if you could also pick up on some of the other points made, but particularly Tony's direct question about Rylands.
In relation to Teresa's question, it's quite specific. So what I suggest is that I put my email address in the chat, and Teresa, you can drop me a line, and then I can get some information back to you on funding for that kind of project. I'd like to pick up on a couple of things, first of all, that Kim said about how we grow talent for young people. And that also is relevant for the heritage sector as well. And we've just recently launched a new project with £5 million worth of funding from the Hamish Ogston Foundation, and that is to create apprenticeships in heritage construction training, in skills for heritage construction. So that's a really exciting project. We've got 2 apprentices already in place, and watch that space for more information on that. That's a project that's only related to the North as well, so really exciting in terms of opportunities for young people. And then going back to Kim's point about disconnect between planning departments and reuse of historic buildings, we absolutely have to be pragmatic in relation to reuse of our historic buildings. Nobody wants to see empty buildings. They're not good for anybody. And we've got to build on what's special about those historic buildings and give new life to buildings and get life in the buildings, get a sustainable use. We work closely with local authorities across the north, across the country, to help to find solutions for that kind of project. So I really hope that we're helping to find pragmatic solutions to some of those problems. Moving on to Lord Inglewood's points, maintenance, yes. Yes. Stitch in time. If you maintain a building, you don't then have to spend huge amounts on repairing a derelict building. And ironically, with the grant system set up the way that it is, we tend to reward people for leaving buildings to fall into a state of disrepair. So absolutely, we need to bring around a revolution in the way we consider maintenance of buildings. All buildings need maintaining, not just historic buildings. But people automatically assume, oh, historic buildings are going to be really expensive. We should be maintaining all buildings. So yeah, fully support fiscal incentives to bring about maintenance as a mainstream part of managing estates. Tony's points about diversity, absolutely. Everybody's heritage is important and we want to know about it. We want to celebrate it. And we're working hard as Historic England to make sure that we work with communities across the north to try and understand what's important to everybody and celebrate what's important to them. So yeah, that's really important to us. Rylands House, don't know it specifically, but the hackles on the back of my neck stood up when you said you'd been told it wasn't worthy of protection, it wasn't important enough. I really believe passionately that local heritage is really important, and we are working hard to balance recognition of our heritage across the country, and absolutely local heritage is very, very important, and we should recognise that. At Historic England, we're looking at how we can work more with local communities to balance out that the way we've been putting our money into historic assets in the past. So I can assure you that we are looking at that, and local heritage is really important.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Answer everybody's questions. Oh, and there was another one about the mill. I think there's a question in the chat about the mills.
Yeah.
Information that I was talking about. Can we have a link? I'll ask one of my colleagues to bob the link in the chat, and then you've all got access to that new document, that new bit of research.
Yeah, so I think they're really good responses from all. I think we're sort of having a really good discussion. I think Kim, you've obviously sort of raised quite a good discussion in the chat. Good points, Kim. Rates are another major barrier to cultural organisation occupying cities and towns, as is the developer tactic of offering spaces rather than equity in buildings. I think there's a lot around the education piece. Somebody Ed Matthews refers to the proposed Pennine Lancashire Linear Park, holds the potential to improve the lives and future of its communities through a series of embedded cultural programmes. So that's another probably very good example. Any information, just do put it in on the chat and we'll try and capture that. I'm not sure we've got anybody specifically from the Northeast. If Julie Elliott was here, she would be saying good stuff. So Tony King says, in the Northeast, fewer than half our young people take a creative subject at GCSE. Given academies don't have to follow the national curriculum, some secondaries have axed music at Key Stage 3. This damages creativity in STEM subjects and damages careers and lives. Young people who make music tell us that their way in was through family or school. Young people who don't have to take part tell us that their school experience of music was absent or poor, and culture isn't consciously part of home life. how can we have a thriving cultural sector and cultural life that involves everyone when these barriers exist? And I think whether that's in the Northeast or not, I think it's a really valid point about, and we have discussed that. We had a look at, in our accessibility session, we looked at that in particular, and there's more around how we can get the national curriculum lists so it is seen that that cultural learning is a really good career opportunity. And I suppose then I'll leave it there, because Anita Greensill again has done some really good questions around cultural recovery funding, and we'll probably move on to that into the next session. But I just wondered if Dan and Catherine, if you just really wanted to finish off with a few comments around that cultural piece, an opportunity not being available for the young, or not being offered, or really the disparities or inequalities that exist around cultural in certain parts of the North, or perhaps in lots of parts of the North. Who should I go with first? Dan.
Well, thank you. Look, I'm really enthused at the work that's going into this report. I think there is a sort of head of steam behind it, and I think that's very positive and very constructive, and it's really great to see the number of people who are rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. For me, it goes back to the twin arguments, if you like, around the economic value of the sector, which is very, very significant, but then the wider benefits in terms of the colour that it adds to people's lives. This is a sector that draws our communities together, and I think that is incredibly valuable. But it is a sector that's been particularly hit hard by the impact of COVID. So I think this work is very timely, and I think we have to be sort of sensible about the way that we link it to government's priorities if we want to attach the kind of resource and the investment that we're going to need to see. The Levelling Up agenda, I think, does provide an important tool for progressing some of these arguments. I also think, and the report may not necessarily be published in time to inform the comprehensive spending review, but we do need to be having conversations with government about the spending review and what it will deliver for the sector. I think the point that Kim made earlier was absolutely the right one about investing in young people and making sure that kids get opportunities to engage with arts, culture, the heritage sector, regardless of their background. That is incredibly good. These are formative experiences, and we should be making sure that all kids, all communities get access to them. I think that's all I want to say, but thank you for the invite.
Yeah, great to have you, and thanks for that. And Catherine, I think, perhaps picking up on that whole thing really from Historic England's point of view about, the opportunity to get the culture, and, it's a really valid opportunity for a future career. And
as I said right at the start of this, heritage is accessible to all. It's free to everybody to experience. So from that sense, it's very, very inclusive. Thinking about young people, we have a great program where we work with we work with schools, and we work with the teachers and provide them with the tools to work with kids, to teach them and help them to understand about the importance of heritage in their local area. So we provide the teachers with the tools, and then they can go out and work with young people. And we've seen some fantastic projects where young people from age 5 right up to sort of A levels are getting involved with their local heritage. And once you've got people interested and excited about their local area, then we start to value it more, and there's more pride taken in an area. I think the other thing that we've been working on as well is the cultural programme that goes with our High Street Heritage Action Zone programme. So as part of that cultural programme, we've had young people making amazing films and artwork to say, why is their town centre important to them? What do they want from town centres going forwards? How do they do their shopping, and what do they want to experience when they go into their town centre? So that's been really valuable to us to hear from younger people, to understand what they want going forwards. So it's a really, really important point, and it's something that is high on everybody's agenda. We've just got to make it work, and we've got to do it.
Well, thanks very much both to Catherine and Dan. I just wondered, Kim or Lord Inglewood, if you want to come back on any of the points that have been raised, or you okay?
Oh, fine, thanks, Julia.
Right, okay, so that's sort of stage one, and great contributions, really lively chat. Please, as I've said, keep putting comments and thoughts in there to keep this going, because it's I think we're all passionate about actually, celebrating Northern culture. So I'm really pleased that in the next session we've got three excellent contributions and to add to this evidence session. And again, this is really about unlocking the North's potential, rebalancing the opportunities. How do we build back the North's cities and towns for tomorrow's generation? I think that's a really big question. I think it's also a very big question, which is around, great cities, great towns, but really selling the brand of the North and what that does actually to the UK PLC. I think one of the best persons to comment on that is probably Sacha Lord, who's been very busy in the pandemic, fighting for Northern culture, amongst other things. I'm really delighted to have you here, and congratulations on actually delivering Parklife. It's good to see you again. So really interested in your perspective, Sacha.
No, thank you, Jill, and thank you for the invite. We consistently talk about levelling up. This is the big phrase, isn't it? Levelling up. And I think whatever political party you're aligned to, we all share one thing here in common, and that's the North, isn't it? We want the best for the North. And only this week, some Arts Council figures came out, which actually shocked me. And it was the annual investment per head for 17-18 and 19-20. And just to shine a spotlight on the difference, London, Westminster was £202.89 per head. Lambeth, £144.46 per head. Islington, £74.09 per head. Southwark, £53.96. Camden, £52.99. Here in Greater Manchester, Wigan, £1.96. Stockport, £2.23. Tameside, £2.84. Bury, £2.85. Rochdale, £3.07. So anybody that says we're levelling up, there is now stark evidence that that is absolutely not the case. And I think we've got a long journey and a long way to go to actually get to that equal balance. But I think this is the moment we can do this now, coming out of this pandemic. Then the question, how can we maximise the North's political potential and unlock the rebalance of opportunities? Well, for me, one of the biggest things has to be transport. In Greater Manchester, we have done something called R-Pass, where teenagers can travel across the city region, going across our 10 boroughs free of charge. That's really unlocked many opportunities for them. To get from our cities, from city to city, it's either the transport system doesn't exist or it's far too expensive. And again, this isn't us versus London, but you have a capped system in London where you can spend up to £1.55 a day and you can jump on the bus and then into a train and things like that. We don't have that here in the North. And I think we need those powers to make it more accessible and to give people that don't have the money, the opportunity that everybody should have across our city regions. I think as well, we've seen clearly during this pandemic, and it's not down to the pandemic, but certainly COVID has expedited it. We've seen the resurgence of the death of our high street, the traditional high street as we know it. The likes of Debenhams, British Home Stores, Woolworths, Dorothy Perkins, they've now all gone. They're not going to come back. And these large vacuum spaces that are left on the high street, retail is extremely difficult. We know that. So these large spaces are ideal for things like galleries, ideal for theatres, museums, experiential experiences. you know, these are, our sector can actually fill those huge voids. I also think, you know, the public sector, the local authorities can now play a role with these empty retail spaces. And the perfect example is something that we're working on again in Greater Manchester in the borough of Oldham. So in Oldham, they have a shopping centre called Spindles. The local authority have just taken over Spindles. And what they're doing is they're going to turn half of it into office space. And the other retail part, we're going to support grassroots culture, whether it's live music or artists. We're going to give them spaces with reduced rent and the affordability to actually create something and start thriving. So, you know, the local authorities can play a huge part in this, in supporting those grassroots opportunities. I think one thing that we have to really address now coming out of this is, as the culture sector is coming back to life and as these opportunities are appearing, we also know that there is a fashion where people want to live more in the city centres. So I think the whole of the North should adopt the policy of agents of change. Now, how many times have we seen somebody complaining, somebody in a flat complaining about a live music venue next door? They've chosen to rent that apartment or buy that apartment next to a venue that plays live music. You know, clearly what's going to happen? You're going to hear noise. So I think, firstly, anyone that doesn't know what agent of change is, and I guess most of you actually do, is where if you are building a set of apartments next door to live music or a bar or a restaurant, the developer has to completely insulate it to make sure that there isn't going to be any issues. Vice versa, if the nightclub or the live music venue decides to rip out the sound system and put a much louder sound system in, then it's on them to make sure that their venue is insulated so they don't cause any issues. And I think we're going to see much more of that over the next couple of years. But the final thing for me, and you know, Catherine mentioned this, that the word inclusive, and I really love this word inclusive, and it's something that I've battled with for the last 27 years, because, you know, my background is putting parties on, whether you call it parties or whether you call it raves or whether you call it festivals, whatever it is. I always think there's been a snobbery around the word culture, and I fight this every single day. We need to break it down more. I think sometimes the word culture can be seen as quite aloof. I don't think it can be accessible to quite a lot of kids. You know, they hear the word culture and they automatically align that with museums or theatres, where it's not. For me, culture is, you know, it is being stood in a festival, in a field. It is on the football terraces. You know, culture is what people like. It's the popularist thing. And I think we've got a real job on our hands here, because there are organisations across the North who, frankly, they do not get it. You know, they don't, in my opinion, they don't understand popular culture. And, you know, I'm just in the last 2 weeks, and you've mentioned it, Jill, 2 Fridays ago, I had 35,000 people on for New Order. It was New Order's biggest ever UK gig. 80,000 people each day for Parklife. Warehouse project started last Friday. We're going to welcome 320,000 people into the city centre. We are bringing tourists in. Hotel rates during Parklife were running at 97% capacity. I've seen from ticket sales, people came from all over the UK. Or, you know, those events, they get ignored by some organisations. And I just think it's wrong. I think we need to break down this stigma of, you know, it's not just about galleries. It's not just about theatre. You know, popular culture needs to come to the forefront. And I would actually argue that things like festivals and live music gigs is more relevant culturally than other parts of the sector. And, you know, that's it from me. Thank you for inviting me, Jill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I think it's a really important question, which also sort of Catherine and Lord Inglewood and others have raised, that what is culture? And culture is literally when you open your door. You don't have to look very far to access it. But I think, you know, that understanding about what it is needs to be broadened, and people really, you know, that vital part that it plays in our economy and creating an inclusive society is absolutely so important when we build back and everything. I'm going to quickly move on to Claire from the wonderful New Writing for the North, because and you've just done some amazing work, Claire, but I think I'll let you speak really around what needs to be done in terms of capitalizing and building back that very important part of culture, which is actually writing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. I speak as the Chief Executive of New Writing North, and we've been developing writers and writing in the North and making things happen within the North, but also exporting talent out of the region for 25 years. So today I'm going to talk a bit, I'm going to look forwards more than think about recovery, because actually for literature, writing and publishing, the pandemic has not been as devastating as it has been for many other art forms. So, and I always like looking forward. I'm an eternal optimist. So I'm going to think about the future. And I'm really today going to talk about talent pipelines and how I'm thinking about supply chains and what the North has and what it could have in this area. So we've already mentioned Wordsworth today, so that was a brilliant start. But as we all know, the North is a powerhouse for literature. It always has been, and it always will be, but it tends to often fly a bit below the radar. We are recognised for our leading writers, and we produce, and we are known for the independent publishing scene here. And that's gaining traction with commercial publishers as well. So we've seen recently, pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, lots of moves from commercial publishing setups such as HarperCollins and Hachette UK, who have all branched into the idea of regional offices, and the North has received a number of them. So we now have HarperCollins in Manchester, Hachette in Manchester, and Hachette also in Sheffield and Newcastle. With Media City and Channel 4, you begin to see, or I begin to see, the vision I see for the North is that we are becoming a much bigger centre of content production for the written word than we ever have been. And just yesterday I was at the announcement in the Northeast with the BBC investing 25 million, I think it is, in content development and production in the Northeast. I think things are scaling up a little bit, but I don't think we're thinking enough about the talent supply chain that feeds some of these industries. All of them rely on the source material of ideas, of new writing and the creatives that produce those to be the powerful engines for all this production. It tends to boil down to writers. Yet the organisations and networks that support writers are so underinvested in, and sometimes not even invested in at all. And writers' earnings continue to reduce year on year. It's becoming an even more difficult profession to get into than it used to be, and it's becoming very hard to sustain a life as a working writer. It always has been harder to be a working, successful writer in the North, but I think it could get a lot harder if we don't make some big moves to rebalance. It irks me and it really frustrates me that nobody seems to give any weight or little attention to these kind of issues. And that's partly because literature organisations like my own are quite small, and we too are under-resourced. Arts Council, I mean, I tend not to like moaning about Arts Council grants, but they give very little to literature, they give very little to writing, yet it is an art form that underpins so many others and underpins so much of our creative industries. And this is important, not just on an economic argument, but as we've heard today, culture is important in terms of how we think of ourselves. And it's important to me because we still need to see more writing that better reflects the true diversity of the lived experiences of the people of this country. There's nothing like reading in your own voice or seeing yourself in books when you are a young reader to uphold and strengthen your feelings of self-worth and inclusion. By publishing and producing work by writers from a range of backgrounds and locations, we innovate, we mix up, we create new literature, and we disobey the dominant narratives, which are often white, middle class and southern, even in the North, and we invent new things. So we need writing to provoke and support cultural change in the North, and we in turn need to support writing that changes perception of our region, internally and externally. And again, I think writers are a very underused and a misunderstood resource when it comes to some of these big ideas about how we shift ideas about the North and the narrative that we hear about some of the parts of the region. So today, I'm using today to make a call for action for the future of writing and publishing industries within the Northern Cultural Powerhouse. And I've got 2 steps. 1, let's invest seriously in the infrastructure that supports writing. We need to create more favourable conditions for new writers and literary businesses to grow and develop in the North, and we need a big step change to enable this. To play our part, New Writing North is developing a new major centre for writing, publishing and content in Newcastle. In partnership with higher education, commercial and independent publishers, content producers and freelance practitioners, we will establish a truly unique and imaginative new physical centre, which will become a new talent engine for the North. Benefiting creative talent across the North, this bold intervention presents an opportunity to shift the dial on who gets to write and who gets to work in the industries that surround writing. The centre will bring together new partnerships across sectors and create dynamic new ways to explore the role that writing and reading can play in well-being, skills development, our perception of place and employability in the North. For me, this is what levelling up the creative industries looks like. It's about long-term investment, a really bold move, but something that builds on what we're already good at here. And I think that for me is partly where we need to be thinking at the moment. How do we build on what we already have? 2, democratise opportunities and invest in things that we know work. I believe that talent is everywhere, but I know everyone in this room knows that the opportunities are often not. We've done a great deal of work at New Writing North recently, working on projects such as A Writing Chance, which was funded by the actor Michael Sheen, that create innovative access opportunities into industry for new writers from historically underrepresented communities. The writers on these programmes tell us that they lack the confidence to engage with the industry professionally, that they come from backgrounds where books and writing were not in the picture, and that they lack role models, networks, and often practical financial resources to help them make their way into the industry. A shaming tidal wave, I know it's been mentioned in the chat already, of recent research confirms that the creative industries remain elitist and unrepresentative of the population at large, and they are predominantly filled with people from middle class and often upper class professionals, and are still untenably tethered to London and the South East. New Writing North wants to change this narrative so that people of all ages from Rotherham, Blackpool, Gateshead and Berwick feel like they have a fair crack at the whip and a fair chance to develop their talents and contribute to the creative life of the UK. And to do this, we need new kinds of investment in the talent pipeline, especially in early career talent. We all know young people have had a really, really poor experience of COVID, and I think we should be thinking now about how we invest differently in young people to help them both catch up and to broaden the opportunities that they can have. We currently run a Young People's Talent Fund that wraps micro investment around mentoring and support to enable young people to develop new creative ideas. It's a really simple programme, and it could be built up and modelled on to work across other art forms. And we'd welcome the chance to talk more about this kind of investment and to find partnerships that could make that work. It would be great if all the 10 metro mayors, or however many they are, sorry, the great northern mayors could think about young people a bit more when they're thinking about their creative strategies.
Yeah.
We also run the flagship Northern Writers Awards, founded 20 years ago, and we invest £50,000 a year into mentoring, cash awards and industry engagement. And over 70% of the writers that go through that programme get published and often take their first steps into professional careers as writers. One of them, just to try and match Dan's early story about the Jamie experience in Sheffield, Ben Meyer is a writer that we supported when no publisher would look at him, published a book called The Gallows Pole with a small publisher in Yorkshire called Bloom's Books. It's currently now being shot into a BBC film in Calderdale by Shane Meadows, and has also facilitated, people have made maps around the book. There's a tourism aspect to it. Investing in writing and these kind of projects makes sense in a much broader way, but I think we need to get better at telling the stories behind events like that. Independent evaluation of the projects I've talked about demonstrates that they deliver high impact, develop economic activity, and often life-changing opportunities for the people involved, but they remain stubbornly difficult to resource and to fundraise for, and we rely on a patchwork of investment of charitable support to enable this work. It shouldn't have to be the way we resource real cultural change in the North or develop our talent supply chains. These projects work well to achieve inclusivity and diversity and produce the role models of the future that we know we need to enable more change. So my call today is to say, please, let's invest more in the things that have been proven to work and think more ambitiously about what we can achieve in the North. Let's be ambitious for our writers and ambitious about what they can do for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That's fantastic. And, you know, you're so right. I think people often forget, you know, whether you're watching a film or even listening to music or poetry, whatever. I mean, it underpins the arts, doesn't it? From, you know, and that talent pipeline needs to be supported. I think there's loads of stuff happening in the chat, which, again, I know when we'll listen to Ian and then come back. I think that thing around inclusivity and exclusivity is coming up again and again. And obviously those are big issues around future opportunities and tomorrow's talent pipeline. And that is the point of this thing. We are looking at, you know, those opportunities being realised and fulfilled, really, and getting that investment right. So anyway, who better to actually talk about regional disparities and inequalities but Professor Ian Wray from the UK 2070 Commission. So just very interesting to hear what you've got to say, Ian. And take yourself off mute. There.
Thank you. Good to go. Thank you very much, Jill. And we're really delighted to have this invitation. UK 2070 has been looking at regional inequalities and regional development for 3 or 4 years now. We started before the term levelling up had been invented. And a lot of people told us we were wasting our time and that people weren't interested in this kind of thing 4 years ago, quite amazingly. We do think that culture is central to Northern recovery. And you can see that from the content of the letter which Lord Kerslake, who chairs UK 2070, is just about to send to the Chancellor on the Comprehensive Spending Review, because we identify 4 points, key points in that letter. And one of them is all about culture. Give you some examples of what we're asking for. We're suggesting projects in 5 old industrial towns to use all the arts and cultural assets as the basis for community building, better mental health and education outside schools, not inside schools. We'd like to see the creation of a network of cultural flagship institutions outside London, building on the experience of things like the Tate in Liverpool. And we'd like to see designation of national heritage areas to prime a fresh approach to World Heritage sites and comparable assets linked to a new UK World Heritage Fund. Well, you might find it rather surprising that we're arguing for that kind of thing, because people think about regional development and they usually immediately think about infrastructure, hard infrastructure like high-speed railways and roads and trams and sometimes dams and sewers. And examples of this are not hard to find, are they? Why is this? Well, perhaps it's partly because it's pretty easy to make the economic case for building hard things using cost-benefit analysis. And maybe, as Professor Bent Fleverberg in Oxford has suggested, there's a very powerful lobby out there in banks, consultants and contractors for investing in hard infrastructure. But I'd like to argue that there is in fact another kind of infrastructure, soft infrastructure, and that it's frequently overlooked. And by soft infrastructure, I mean culture in the widest sense, cultural landscapes like national parks, football clubs, cultural institutions like galleries and universities, historic cities, and even and especially popular culture like rock music and so on. People think that's trivial, but it isn't. The global rock music industry in 2019, when I looked last at the statistics, was worth $20 billion. How much do we think about this kind of thing? How many Northern World Heritage sites can you name, for example? There are 7. There are no points for the one we've recently lost, but there certainly would be if you could get all 7. So we think there's a very strong case for using cultural investment, and I've called it soft infrastructure, as a springboard for Northern revival. We know the headline success stories, the big headline success stories like Newcastle Sage, York's National Railway Museum, the new V&A in Dundee, Liverpool and Tate, the BBC at Salford, and Jodrell Bank, which is now a World Heritage Site. But much more could be done, especially at community level. It doesn't need big money, and it won't be done by bureaucrats. If you look at Liverpool's creative boom in music and much else in the 1960s, you can see that it was actually a fairly organic, if not anarchic process. And it was underpinned by just a couple of institutions. First of all, the art schools, from which most of these rock musicians emerged, both up north and down south, and by minor philanthropy. The city council appointed a guy called Philip Bailey, a teacher of genius who worked in the youth clubs, teaching young people to play guitars before they were even known of elsewhere in the country. I'm actually personally up to my neck in this now, because I'm one of two directors of a new jazz orchestra working with local songwriters and musicians in Liverpool. And I've been working for 6 months with Wray, who used to be vice president of Universal Music Group, to try and establish a new music ecosystem up here. It's all being done on a shoestring, and really we are finding it really hard to get the message over. I don't think I'm breaking any secrets by telling you that Wray became a slightly frustrated man as a result of trying to set these initiatives off. But that's the kind of thing we really need to do. We really do need to get moving, and we need the modest institutional support to get us away from doing everything on a shoestring. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Ian. And I think it is, you referenced, Liverpool and some of the, the shoestring sort of really the catalyst for such a, great cultural output and talent. I think you could probably reference that, from Lowry to probably, as we've already said, from Lord Inglewood to Wordsworth and
Sure.
And the hippie commune and and things like that. But it's like, how do we actually really grasp that talent? And there is this sort of lack of equilibrium, which we, I referenced at the very beginning, and the point of the inquiry is that it isn't fair. The figures that Sacha read out were disgraceful. I shall certainly be telling James Daly, who's the Conservative chair of the group, that £2.85 isn't very good. And we need to battle together. I just wanted to say, with Kim and Lord Inglewood, if you've got any particular questions, then I'm going to open it up a little bit from questions in the chat. But Kim, you've got your hand up first. And then Lord Inglewood, and questions, say who you want to answer them, or I'll get everybody to chip in.
Thanks, Jill. I just wanted to pick up on Professor Ian Wray, and just to say that some of those bands in the 60s also were influenced by the black music that was brought over from America, and that was appropriated by the Beatles. So some acknowledgement of that would have been great. The other point I wanted to raise was Sacha was mentioning about levelling up and transport, and I'm making no apology being a Labour MP. When this government talks about levelling up and then talks about taking away £20 universal credit uplift, increasing national insurance contributions, the rising cost of living costs, this is all going to have an impact on people able to access things that aren't free. We have in Liverpool, free access to our museums and stuff, but some people don't have the disposable income to get on a bus to go and visit these places. So transport, again, is very important, and having the resources to be able to do that is key. And in terms of reading, what I would say, and I can't remember, was it Claire?
Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, what I would say is that great reading is really important. you know, but I have an issue in terms of the curriculum and the books that kids get to read in the curriculum. They're very monocultural. They don't look at authors from different ethnic backgrounds, and in that respect, I think, you can't be what you can't see. So increasing and encouraging young people to read, because a lot of kids get to start reading in school. And so it's really important, to have that, again, connection between, writing up and north and, looking at links to schools to make sure that the national curriculum and schools have a wide breadth of books so that young people can be interested and so they see themselves in those books. That's it. Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Kim. And Lord Inglewood, and then we'll come back because there's sort of a question to each one of you there. So
I've got a point ready for each, please. As far as Sacha Lord was the comments have made, I thought they was excellent as far as they went, but there was no reference to rural, and the problems for rural communities are slightly different. And taking the north as a whole, there are a lot of people who don't live in the metro centres. And I think it's something not specifically aimed at him, but I think it's something that needs thinking about in the context of this inquiry. And as far as his comments about town centres and neighbourliness, it reminded me of a time I chaired a planning committee when a rowdy restaurant looked like it was going to open next door to an old people's home. So as chairman, I wrote to the local GP and asked if he had any comments. And he wrote back saying, they're all so old and so deaf, it won't make any difference anyway.
Dear. Terrible.
Bill, can I just come back on that first
yes.
point? It's a good point, Lord Inglewood. One thing that we are seeing, and I can only really talk about Greater Manchester because it's where I represent and where I live, but we predicted this and it's happened. The bigger the city centre, the harder it's going to be to recover. And what we're seeing most definitely in Greater Manchester is made up of 10 boroughs. The vast majority of people are still working from home, and during the lockdown, or when that period when we're allowed to open for those few weeks in hospitality, people decided to stay local and not go into the city centres. The fear of public transport. They had time to think about the added expense of, at the end of the night at 2-3 in the morning, having to queue in the taxi queue and pay for the taxi in the rain and things like that. So we've definitely seen a shift now where the more rural areas, the suburbs, are actually thriving in terms of hospitality. I do think it's going to take a couple of years to get everybody back into the city centre. But yeah, just on that first point.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's fun. As far as Claire was concerned, the thing that I think is both relevant in this context and is something perhaps one ought to think about in terms of trying to mitigate some of the consequences has been, and it's something I've had involvement with over a number of years, has been the decline in the number of journalists on local newspapers. Because actually, one way or another, there was quite a lot of opportunity for writing exposure, even if it wasn't creative writing, through that medium, and it got people going a bit. And I wonder whether there isn't ways in the way that in the new era with different forms of local communication, whether that can't be used to give people basically practice, because a lot of writing, in my experience, is doing it and working out how you're going to do it and how to express yourself and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then finally, as far as Ian Wray is concerned, I think his point about the World Heritage Sites and heritage sites is absolutely right. As somebody who's been involved and lives on the edge of the Lake District, I'm fully aware both the cultural contribution that these soft, what I call cultural infrastructure, he's called soft infrastructure, contributes, but also the economic wealth that is created by them. And of course, one of the problems is the people who do the work on it all aren't the people who gain the financial benefit. And there's no very obvious nexus linking the two together. And I also think he's absolutely right about rock music. I'm not a great expert, to put it mildly, on rock music, but quite clearly, some rock music is of significant cultural value and is going to endure. The problem, of course, is that most of it's garbage.
You said that, Sacha?
Well, we don't agree on that point, but there's something that is just made me think about when you're talking about rock music and tours and things like that. And again, I'll reference my own events because I can speak personally, but when you talk about culture and events, quite often people don't understand the ecology around that. And I spoke before about hotels, an occupational level of 97%. When Parklife took place just that one weekend, forget what happened in the park, but that brought £11 million into Greater Manchester in terms of taxis, hotels, new outfits, restaurants. And again, with the warehouse project, that will bring £13 million into it. So, this is something that's attached around our sector. We have so many spin-offs and we benefit so many other sectors, especially during rock concerts.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Claire and Ian as well, just to reply to Kim's and Lord Inglewood's points there.
If I may, I think Kim's point about what we're all reading and what kids are being taught is really important. And it's a long game to shift some of that in terms of who produces that work. I think there are things happening in the industry at the moment that are positive in that regard. We are running a project called Rebalancing the Books, which is helping schools in the Northeast restock their school libraries with a more diverse and representative series of books. And the Granter Foundation has funded us to do that. We'd love to, again, roll that out across the North if we can. But I suppose, I feel like it's my job in terms of being in charge of one part of the soft infrastructure, if we're going to call it that, is about thinking about where the authors of the future are going to come from, and they have to be more representative and they have to come from all our communities. The point about journalism, I think what's interesting, I think we're seeing a rise of hyperlocal news writing now, and I think that will continue, and that I think offers opportunities for the North in terms of how we communicate to each other and about what we are. But also, I think we have to get abreast of the digital changes that are impacting on all these areas of production. So yes, we may not have local newspapers in the same way, but there's a lot of other writing opportunities that writers can embrace if they are networked into them, and if our skills development works, so they're ready to take up those opportunities, whether or not that's games writing, hybrid, digital and publishing. There's a lot of opportunity, but that is a changing landscape.
Okay, and Professor Ian Wray.
Yes, well, just responding to Kim's point, it's a very important point. Yes, indeed, that great creative boom in music did borrow a great deal from black music, but let's be fair to those people. When people like McCartney, Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, they absolutely revered black musicians, and many of them went over to the States and became great friends with them. There's a wonderful quote from the Beatles first arriving in America, where an American reporter asked Paul McCartney what he wants to see in the States. And he replies, I want to see Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters was the great Chicago black blues musician. And the reporter replied, Muddy Waters, where's that? To which McCartney responded by saying, well, don't you know who your famous people are over here? And I think this relates to another point about the importance of music, and particular popular music, as opposed to perhaps what you might describe as elitist music. It really does break down barriers. I've been playing in bands off and on ever since the 1980s, and it completely breaks down class barriers, racial barriers, and gender barriers, because when you're playing music with people, you just want to know how good they are as musicians. So it's a fantastic tool for bringing people and communities together.
Right, I've got a really controversial one here from, hang on, let me find it, from Robert Scott from Musicians Union.
Yeah.
Please, could you quickly give us an idea of some rock music which is rubbish? From you, Lord Inglewood.
It's for me, is it?
And
He's
you
ringing me up to give the answer. The short answer is a lot. I've heard a lot of stuff I think is pretty good rubbish, but I can't remember what it's called.
I think you might be on your own there. So,
well, no, I'm standing by the proposition. I mean, if you look at music, say in the 17th century or the 18th century or the 19th century, most of it is ephemeral. If you look at literature, which is something I know much more about, most books end up in the 50p section of secondhand bookshops and then go to be pulped. It's the same. There are a few at any generation that will really survive and endure. That's the way of the world. And as I said in my remarks, there is some rock music, and I said it's not my particular passion, which is absolutely terrific and will last and remain as part of the cultural inheritance of future generations. But just as this stuff has evaporated from other forms of music in previous generations, so most rock music will go the same way.
I don't know, Sacha, if you want to come back on that or not.
Well, I'd just like to invite Lord Inglewood to the Warehouse project on any night. Treat him. It's not rock music, but I'll treat some techno music.
There you are.
Well, be careful. Perhaps I might accept.
Okay, well, very quickly, let's go a bit back a bit more seriously, because we've got some really good comments in the chat, and I'll just whiz through some of them and we can discuss. So from Hannah Baldwin, I agree that funding for combined authorities and working with local authorities is key in terms of capacity and resource for strategic overview and coordination. However, in my experience, these types of organisation often use funding to create their own projects to meet manifesto pledges, etc., rather the less sexy, as Lord Inglewood's term, task of capacity building the sector. So, I mean, maybe that's right or wrong, discuss, but developing leadership, resilience, which are the word of the day, joining things up and creating the conditions for innovation, in brackets failure. Siloed working is also a significant challenge. Kim's comment, needing to join up across culture and planning departments. Sacha's example, reference spindles in Oldham sounds really interesting. How can we ensure, coming to the question now, that investment and support for Northern culture nurtures the grassroots and helps to readdress the current balance of power, allowing communities to define culture for themselves and lead change in their local areas? That's quite a very broad question, and obviously just some thoughts in there. I'll go on to Anita, who also asked a very good question earlier, who says levelling up can only happen if the workforce that underpins the success of these sectors are looked after properly. And I know Sacha will agree with that one. The DCMS's new evolving framework for valuing culture and heritage, as well as the recent review into the Treasury Green Book process, will you be drawing on these for understanding of culture in the North? Lots in there from Trevor McFarlane as well, also talking about and Hannah coming back to say a lot of work is going on at the GMCA and in Clare's and all of those things, and Tony King's also been active. Catherine, you put in here something, and gigs take place in some beautiful heritage locations, Albert Hall, Manchester, the Peace Hall, Halifax. I could go on. So not remembering the piece about infrastructure. And going back to this thing around elitism and inclusive stuff, really Southern centric. I think it's a really thing when we talk about levelling up, rebalancing, building back. Layla Duranville says music is not elitist, but the industry and the opportunities to be part of the talent pipeline can be or are elitist. There's quite a few things there. And Trevor McFarlane says Lord Inglewood in Warehouse Culture would be truly amazing. So I think you've whatever you say, Lord Inglewood, I think you're going to the warehouse.
Well, I look forward to it, as I can say.
So there we are.
My children are very jealous.
They will be. So there's quite a few comments there, and because I'm conscious that we've been going quite a long time, and I just really thought, well, on some of those points that have been raised in the chat, I mean, if I could just really quickly ask, perhaps going back to Ian, and then Claire, and then ending with Sacha. And I think we'll probably call it a day unless I find any other entertaining points in the chat. But okay, so Ian.
Yes, thanks. I've got to admit that I tend to agree with the point that people in large organisations tend to fund their own projects. We're dealing here with a very, very organic cultural process, and as I said before, almost an anarchic process. So what can we do to help it? How can we get down to the bottom level and just give a modest amount of support to people who will need very modest things like small venues, cheap rehearsal facilities, and an efficient mechanism for getting in touch with people to add to word of mouth? And I'm told, incidentally, by musicians that social media is useless as a means of finding musical contacts. And what seemed to happen in the 60s was small organizations, charities, and individuals did this. So we need to find a way of getting that money down to those people, fairly small amounts of almost seed capital money. And I think that has to be done probably through the district councils and maybe the education services, because I think in most districts, people in the council, the right people, you talk to the right people, they will know who these movers and shakers are.
Okay, thanks, Ian. That's interesting. And Claire. Oh, switch off.
Sorry. I think, just to echo back something Dan was talking about right at the beginning of this session around, I think we need to think more broadly across the North. And I'm interested, I think these debates often get down to a very hyper-local level very quickly, either people really invested in cities or really concerned about rural areas. But the work I do, and I think I'm not alone, is much broader than that. And I think we maybe need to start thinking differently about what our communities of interest really are and how they are connected across the North and how they can be galvanised maybe a bit more dynamically than they are. Because I think to really reach the freelance community, you know, the next generation of independent practitioners that are going to make the work coming out of the North, the reach is going to need to be wide, and there won't be the money to do that in the way we want to in every district in the North. So we're going to have to be smarter about how we work, and I think that's the area for me where we need to be doing the thinking at the moment.
Yeah.
Could I just come back to my point about charities for a moment? We have in fact managed to get in the Jazz Orchestra I direct £500 over the last 6 months from a very small charity called Jazz North. That money's been incredibly helpful to us because it's enabled us to commission a piece of music from a writer, bring in a guest artist and get the thing recorded and mixed. So it's a very small amount of money. But again, it came to us via the charitable sector, not via local government or city region mayors.
Yeah.
I mean, the organisation, you know, my organisation turns over £1 million a year, and most of that is a patchwork of charitable donations, bits of sponsorship. It's a real mixture. But to me, I question why I should spend most of my time trying to raise the money for things that are quite fundamental to lots of things we want to do well in the region. And I think a lot of arts organisations are in that state where we have been forced over the years to be much more commercially minded, and that makes our work really complicated to do, or the money side of what we do really complicated. And I agree, small little bits of money, although I worry about the scale of that commission. That doesn't sound like it's a union rate for anyone, but you know, small bits of money can make a huge amount of difference to individuals. They can be the stepping off point when someone steps into a professional career, you know. So I you know, I think I agree with you, but
and I think Becky West makes a really important point that it's just got to be easier.
Yeah.
Easy. It's got to be light touch. You shouldn't spend your whole life filling in application forms.
Yeah, we only had to write a letter for that 500 quid, short letter.
So that the whole process of access to funds and must be more light touch, and sometimes it's quite obvious and quite simple. And I think and the broader point about joining everything up, I think Claire is very much going to be part of the output of our inquiry here. Lord Inglewood, you've just quickly got your hand up.
Please, yes, I was really wondering, arising from those recent remarks, whether in fact quite a lot of this public money ought not to be dispensed via organisations of the kind that Ian Wray's talking about, because that might actually give you a great deal better reach.
Yeah.
And the problem is that once you get into the public sector, public money and the rest of it, there's no end to it. Half the money goes on admin anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to that point, is that actually regional, local leaders and communities, they actually know what they need. Probably, but
I'm not sure about local leaders. I think there are people in local communities who do get it.
Yeah,
that was the point Ben was making.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And Sacha.
No, thank you, Jill. I think just a couple of things for me, really. I think Layla's made a comment in the section regarding music and elitism. That, on a serious note, there is no right or wrong when it comes to music. It's an art form. Sometimes you stand in front of a painting, one person will like it, one person won't like it. So there is no correct answer. I absolutely agree with Professor Wray as well. And there was a comment made, when you look at the football terraces or when you go to a live gig, everybody's there for one reason. It breaks through all forms of demographics. You are there for that love. It doesn't matter whether you're a student, whether you're unemployed, whether you're the postman, a lawyer, you are there for that one reason. And it brings everybody together. I think just one thing I want to share with you just as a closing point, and I think this is a positive step forward. Something happened in my industry, in the festival sector, about probably 6 years ago. There was a large-scale event in London, and when they put the posters up, the fly posters, somebody took a picture and then extracted all the men off the lineup. And actually, it was just a blank poster with 2 women's names written on it. Now, at that point, the industry were absolutely disgraced. And now, moving forward from that, most respectable promoters, and no matter what you think of me, I like to think I am respectable, but most respectable promoters, now it's not just about booking the artist, the first artist that comes into mind that sells the most tickets. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. So when you see the lineup now, and I'll use Parklife again as an example, when you see that big lineup, we make all efforts to make sure it's inclusive and the whole thing's it's equal. So we try to have a gender balance on there. We try to have black and white on there. We try to have LGBT on there. We try to have as many people on there as possible. And I think that is the right way forward to give us most people the opportunity and a platform. And I think that one tipping point for the industry was a very positive moment.
I think that's great. I mean, it's a thought-provoking a point to end on. I'd just like to thank everybody who's joined us today. Excellent repartee and comments and contributions in the chat. As I say, we will accept written evidence if you haven't done so already, but I think we've got quite a rich theme right across the north, coming together. And the State of the North report, there will be a peer review session. We'll invite parliamentarians and other key people to input into that as well, but we will be launching that, as I say, before Christmas, a date to be confirmed. But yeah, that's the plan, and bringing this all together. And I think the other point that I've made and has come out again is that we need to collaborate. We need to work together. I think the metro mayors across the north can come together and should be very much linked to this inquiry. And that would be the intention on whatever date it is we do the State of the North report, not only maybe to get Nadine Dorries, the new culture secretary, to be there, but also to get our northern mayors and MPs all saying the same thing across the piece. And that would be enormously powerful, or I hope it will be, if they are truly and we get Michael Gove there because he's in charge of levelling up, and I think a bit of a culture vulture. But I hope everybody has really, and thank you for all your contributions, across the months of holding the inquiry. Hopefully, I'm sure we're onto something here. And even if it is Lord Inglewood going to the warehouse, tickets will be sold for that one. And you can hear some nice rock music and all of those things. But joking aside, You know, I really thank you for participating. We are working together, and you know, thanks again. And I've managed to keep it going for, we're 10 minutes early, so that's really good. So you can all go and have a cup of tea. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Jill.
Okay, thanks for
Thank
joining.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good to
Bye.
see everyone.